Alright, guys, I gotta reshoot this one because Tulsi makes this campaign so dynamic that by the time I'm finished saying stuff, I already gotta say more stuff! So, the way I see it right now, and let me know, dear voter, if this resonates with you or with people you know when you look out on the landscape, is they're trying to get us to believe that the corrupt Joe Biden future, the business as usual, is what we're campaigning for in 2020. That they're talking about, Joe Biden and Warren with Bernie nipping at the heels, and everyone knows exactly what that race sounds like, so there's no point in tuning in. And that's what they want you to buy into. Bury your head, give up now. They pick, you vote, it don't matter who. And a lot of us don't want business as usual. There are two candidates here that are very much repping not business as usual. And no one's really talking about that in the race. Yeah, there's still, Joe Biden out there to try to make you believe that if you're not tuning in. But we're talking about Hillary Clinton calling Tulsi a Russian agent and Tulsi calling her out as the queen of warmongers and the world being abuzz for the last week about a candidate that wants to end war, open our education system so we can start learning real history and economics and stop falling for the same garbage, go after the Fed, go after the clowns, end trafficking, of course, Medicare for all, single payer plus, which is just like Bernie's plan for people who are saying, oh, she's for Medicare choice, she's for Republic. No, she is for single payer health care. Single payer plus, that's the name of her plan, is pretty straightforward. Single payer is what people have been demanding for a while now. And for those who don't know, the way that works is basically everyone pays into it with their taxes, everyone gets covered. It's just like Bernie's plan, but unlike Bernie's plan, which covers private extra insurance for unions and veterans, because those people potentially might need extra insurance depending on what they get exposed to over the course of their work. But Tulsi's plan also says that if you happen to be another private citizen that wants to pay for something that the government doesn't cover, if you want to seek additional insurance, if a company wants to provide a viable, profitable service that people want to pay for when their basic needs are already being met from their, tax-covered Medicare single-payer insurance, then they can. In other words, one problem that Canada's universal healthcare system has is that it is hard to get access to cures. Certain treatments aren't accessible either in the States or in Canada. You have to go to Mexico or um, pay a lot of money out of pocket to go to a specialist that is not covered, right? And that's not going to change if you have one government edifice that decides what is and isn't covered. That edifice just now becomes the place where all the lobbyists go. And I'm not trying to suggest that we shouldn't go for Medicare for all. Obviously, I'm trying to suggest that if you have the best Medicare system you can that provides all the best health care that we can, uh, get passed through a crooked Congress and crooked pharma companies and all that stuff, get stuff streamlined, get stuff working, but at the same time, if/when some all-powerful government body decides to say that we're not going to cover that, treatment that can get rid of a chronic condition, we're only going to give you pills to treat your chronic condition, you can go outside of that and say, I'm going to find a company that will. And that company can have a, operating system that allows people to get that cure readily accessible. And it could even be a cool nonprofit insurance company like my mom's that, gives dental care to the homeless right now and would probably, once dental care is already provided for everybody, would find some new awesome, gap in what is already existing in order to try to make the world a better place. Because there are awesome insurance companies that actually do that. I just want to say, like, it's not that we should get rid of all private insurance. We should make it so that private insurance has to compete, has to provide something that people want, that people appreciate, that people are willing to pay for in order to continue to exist. If you have a single payer government healthcare system that everyone automatically gets, regardless of their ability to pay or how much money they have in their pocket, making sure no one goes broke from going to the doctor or a hospital, if that already exists, then these other companies need to provide some additional service. In other words, most likely they're going to provide services that the government refuses to cover. Now let's look at the alternative to that. If we don't have the ability to do that, then what happens when the government refuses to cover something? We get people dying of cancer or AIDS or various other diseases saying, government, I'm going to lobby against you because you should give me cures. And you'll have people doing, expensive buyers clubs or having to fly out of the country to get coverage. And, the rich won't care because they just go to Mexico. Free trip. Hooray! And I'm cured and you're good to go. It's going to be the people who can't afford to do that that are really going to be suffering from not having alternatives. And I think that a single payer plus plan is the best way to ensure that neither the government nor the private insurance companies have the power to screw over people and make money off of our sick care instead of our health care. Anyway, as our race currently stands, we got these candidate options. Let me just fill in Steyer a bit more, because he's in the race now. Tom Steyer, Steyer. My name's Tom Steyer, and I'm a billionaire. I'm gonna beat Donald Trump because I'm a better billionaire. I speak better than him, and you'll vote for me. Sorry, Tom, but I won't. I know a lot of people will not. Quite frankly, the way I see Tom Steyer, he's pretty much the new Joe Biden coming into the race. They needed something because they're realizing that, if Joe Biden is so senile that he's talking about making biometric scanners to protect our Second Amendment rights, biometric scanners on our guns to protect our Second Amendment rights, I don't know how exactly that works, among many other very funny gaffes, and he's just straight not willing to address this Ukraine situation. So they realized they needed someone who's not Joe Biden to basically continue to be Joe Biden, to keep people glazed over and not wanting to pay attention because they think that this is all that's happening. So, enter Tom Steyer. Now, we got Marianne is probably no longer in the race, but when she was in the race, she was getting a little bit more mainstream media coverage than Tulsi. And the things that she was saying were things that could have come straight out of Tulsi's mouth. Some of them, anyway. The intelligent side, we'll say. The parts talking about how we need to pay more attention to what people are actually saying and repping and not to what other people in the media say that they stand for. We need to actually understand the content and context of people's message. How we need to be more cooperative, talking about how we have a sick care system, not a health care system in this country. There were some very hard-hitting messages that Marianne brought up, both in the debates and on, Trevor Noah's show and these various other shows that she was allowed to be on, that probably did resonate with some people. And when they found out that she's not really a viable candidate because she doesn't necessarily know her issues and people aren't voting for her and getting really stoked about her because she's not Tulsi Gabbard, they're just gonna go straight up here. Let's be honest. If that's the type of candidate that you're interested in. Cory Booker, his campaign is basically done. He needed to raise $6 million more in order if his campaign was going to continue at the end of September, and he did. But if you need to raise a ton of money to keep your grassroots candidate campaign going, it's not very grassroots, and he's not doing very well in the polls, and his change again message is not really resonating. I mean, his talking about how we need to be more cooperative and we need to work on our poverty and our education, and those are very important issues that do resonate with people. Nobody believes Cory Booker is the guy to do it. But if that's the message that's resonating with you, Tulsi Gabbard has the most forward-thinking education policy, and she's addressing prison reform in all the ways that you would want. Legalize pot, decriminalize opioids, try to get most people access to rehab, and expunge non-violent drug offense records that would no longer be illegal. I mean, I don't know how you can get much better than that. She's talking about making sure that all schools and all teachers get funded more. She's talking about ending wars, so we have the resources to devote to all of those things. And like I said, most importantly, she's the only candidate on this stage talking about not just universal education, but opening our education curricula so we can learn the most useful information that we have for ourselves, not the information that the state says is important so that you can pass the test so you can get funding. And that means that when kids come together in high school and in higher learning, they're not going to all have the same pieces of the same puzzle, so that when they are put off into groups to, learn from each other, they have all this various knowledge that they can come together into an awesome understanding of how the world works, so that we can actually start finding better solutions and stop falling for the same historical tricks that seem to have led conflict in at least the last 150 years or so. It seems to be that it's more or less finding a way to get the people convinced that war is a good idea, so that the people who fund the war can make money off of it and go conquest more territory to exploit. And the people get some advantage, but mostly it becomes sort of an addiction of the society, a necessity in order to keep the society going. Your economy becomes dependent on war. The only thing that got us out of the Great Depression was World War II, right? I mean, there was also some gold manipulation. We could have gotten out of the Great Depression much more quickly if we'd done some better economic policy, but that's another video. Bottom line, the industries that make money off of war become addicted to it. And if your society is dependent on those industries or too heavily influenced by those industries, it can be very difficult to transition your society into a functional peace society. And when we do, it's going to be very good for the world, for our country as well, because Tulsi's talking about a green energy economy, and that is something very different from wind and solar and nuclear. No, that is a green energy economy, basing the economic profits of America on green energy. And this is way better green energy. Imagine a toaster-sized device that could power 4 homes indefinitely. Doesn't take fuel. Now sell that to the world. You think you could make money off of that? A green energy economy. 80% sustainable by 2027, 100% by 2035. And if this sounds unreal, unbelievable, too impossible to be possibly true, I urge you to consider, what would someone who had the ability to make one of those motors do if they already make money off of our energy dependence? If the companies that already own the patents for these motors are making money off of keeping us sort of in the dark ages as far as electricity generation goes, what incentive do they have for rolling out this motor that they can sell to everybody once and then they go out of business? Because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the end of war over energy necessity, of selling people energy. We're talking about the one product, the last product, and then they're done. One to every village housing development, yes, you'll keep selling motors, but compared to how much you make off of water scarcity, off of everything that's involved in the war machine, and off of selling us energy, and off of wind and solar and fixing climate issues, there's a whole ton of money to be made from not allowing a device like that out. And yeah, that sounds conspiratorial, but I want to direct you to one of my favorite historical quotes. It's from 1911 between J.P. Morgan and Nikola Tesla. If there's no wires, where do we put the meter? And that was when Tesla got his funding cut. That was when the trajectory of humanity was changed, because there was a World's Fair that was powered without wires. We're talking about an entire area that was lit up, the City of Lights. It was incredible how bright this was. And it didn't have any wires. Okay, enough on that. Warren, is a hack. Let's be honest, she has no desire to tell the truth, it would seem, and doesn't have much consistency. And yeah, she says things that are of value to be said on that stage, and if your message resonates with you, I encourage you to look at Bernie, and that's not because I'm a sexist, it's because he's consistent on his message. He's not just repping it because it's currently fashionable. Do I believe that Warren could get some of the things that she's talking about done if she were president? Maybe. But the fact of the matter is, there are millions of Americans who do not believe in her, who will not show up to vote for her. And the reason we lost in 2016 was because no one wanted to show up for the battle of the lesser of two evils. There are plenty of people who filled out their ballot and just didn't put in their vote for president. That says a lot. I mean, I personally was praying for that election to have the lowest turnout in American history, to really show the world that this is unacceptable, so that people might actually start paying attention and think that maybe we need to pay attention and not let the race become a clown show. And I was hoping that might get people galvanized to campaign and to realize that we are choosing our next president in 2020 in the primary. And I think it really did. And I think a lot of people are actively involved in this, and they realize that our candidates are polling a lot better, or doing a lot better than the polls say. And if you give us a corporatist, we're all going to know what happened. We're not going to show up, and it will be another 4 years. And you know what? I would rather that than a corporatist who's going to keep business as usual, because I know that after those 4 years, you're going to need to actually make sure this woman is no longer alive on this planet Earth if you want to stop her from becoming our president, our 46th president. So that's our game, buds. Their backs are against the wall, really. They need to find a candidate that they can control, that we will believe in to vote for. And Twitter says Warren ain't it. And I know Twitter isn't everything, but the fact of the matter is, anybody who is not, star-studded and pretending Tulsi Gabbard doesn't exist as a candidate, anybody who's doing some real journalism on some of the hardest hitting issues in our world right now, and not just talking about, well, in the debate this person did so well, did you hear this thing that people who are, in other words, actually really reporting on real news in the world and talking about real events and real concerns, and don't seem to have a opinion that is based on who gives them their job, all see through and completely do not accept Warren as a candidate. And I'm not trying to suggest that, you shouldn't sign up to go get a beer with her, that she's not a great senator, or any of these sort of things. I'm trying to point out that if you want to win in 2020, you need to pick a candidate that can beat an orange man that has been thumped by the media for the past 3 years. It shouldn't be that high of a bar. But you do need to pick someone who can do it. And that's not, I've got a plan for that, Elizabeth Warren, who still doesn't have a health care plan. If the idea of calling out corruption and the people that need to, pay more of their fair share resonates with you, Tulsi's doing it even harder. She's suing Google. She's talking about all corruption, not just Wall Street corruption. There's plenty of red lines that Warren's not willing to cross, and it's clear to me that she's a hack who says a lot more than she's actually going to do if she were in the office. Do I think she'd do an okay job? Maybe. Do I think that she should be, barred from being a senator? Absolutely not. She probably does a fine job there. I mean, she hasn't gotten a whole lot done, but what really, my biggest issue with Warren is it's very clear that she isn't consistent, and she doesn't think lying is all that big of a deal. I mean, there's nothing that was really gained from this whole pregnancy story either way. I mean, most likely it would seem to me that the story seems to be that in 2007, she got a temporary pass to teach even though she didn't have a certification, and that summer she went to school to try to get that certification while she was pregnant, and decided that that was too much for her and didn't stick with school. And that seems to be a perfectly fine story. Pregnancy's exhausting, and taking a turn in life is just dandy. Either way, I think that's how a lot of people are going to read it. And most importantly, if you're willing to if that's not the case, if in 2007 you were making something up to cover for what actually happened, which was that you were fired because you were pregnant, then, I mean, I understand kind of why you did it, because it's not, maybe it wasn't even, 12 years after the actual event itself. I could understand why you might not want to talk about that on the national stage. Regardless, I think a lot of people are going to see it as lying needlessly, and that puts you pretty much just in the same pathological liar camp as the guy you're trying to beat. And I think you really need to field a candidate that people are going to be excited to show up for. Because outside of the deranged camp of people who are going to vote for anybody against Donald Trump just because they're not Donald Trump, a lot of us recognize that our political system has been, a shadow puppet show for a while now. And the reason we got what we got in 2016 is because people didn't want to show up for another corporatist. And that is equally true in 2020. And that message needs to be hammered home. Quite frankly, it's important to me that the people who like to pull the strings in our government know that they can't just give us anybody who says the right things. They need to give us someone who will actually follow through, and they can't rig the people that Americans want out of the elections continuously without us taking offense to that. Anyway. No point in voting for someone who can't beat an orange man who's been thumped for 3 years by the media. Even if you think that she's a cool person, she's saying the right things, and you'd want to go get a beer with her, I encourage you to check out Tulsi Gabbard and compare, because there's a lot of things that Warren is not willing to talk about. What's her foreign policy? That says it all. Yang. I think Andrew Yang is again, he's a corporatist that's saying a lot of the right things. The opposite of an orange businessman is not an Asian businessman. Even if he likes math, let's just look at this. So when he was young, he was a gamer. And what he liked about gaming, this is mostly all from his own book, by the way, is power, status, optimization, and world building. He went to an elite prep school. He went to Brown University and Columbia Law. He then practiced law for about 5 months before co-founding a star-giving stargiving.com philanthropy organization. Worked there for 2 years before it failed, and then he moved to a mobile healthcare and data company in 2002. By 2004, he was the VP. In 2005, he left that company to work with his friend at Manhattan Prep, and by 2006 he was CEO of Manhattan Prep. And Manhattan Prep, we're coming full circle here, he started at an elite prep school, and Manhattan Prep is the most elite of elite tutoring companies. It uses the top 1% of 1% of tutors to tutor the 1%. Like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and McKinsey. McKinsey is the intelligence firm that Pete Buttigieg has been an intelligence agent for the last 9 years, funny enough. And in 2010, he left his Manhattan Prep and became a CEO and co-founder of Venture for America. Venture for America is is an entrepreneurship organization that's supposed to make jobs in America. And its 14-year goal was to make 100,000 jobs. After 7 years, he has made 2,800 jobs, and admits in his book that he probably destroyed more jobs than he's made through automation and optimization. Great. You want to put the guy who can't make jobs, who says that the only way to make jobs in this country is to give us a UBI, up against the guy who has made jobs in this country. I mean, he might win because he's giving people free money, but I'd rather go with the UBI candidate who says, yeah, of course we can make jobs, we just have to deal with these trade deals too. Duh! But a year after founding this underperforming job company, he gets invited to the White House as a champion of change. And by 2015, 3 years later, he's a presidential ambassador for global entrepreneurship. Now, global entrepreneurship, is it just me, or does that sound like an Orwellian doublespeak for globalism? Sorry, but he made a fortune on Wall Street. He's been in law, he's been in philanthropy, he's been in data, he's been in healthcare, he's been in elite tutoring. He's a business. I mean, he taught J.P. Morgan bankers how to make more money. Like, he is the most business of businessmen, and it's clear to me that there's a lot of corruption in this world that he's not talking about. There's this really great Elizabeth Warren quote in this book here called The Deep State by Mike Lofgren. I highly recommend this book, by the way. But check out this quote. Larry leaned back in his chair and offered me some advice. I had a choice. I could be an insider or I could be an outsider. Outsiders can say whatever they want, but people on the inside don't listen to what they have to say. Insiders, however, get lots of access and a chance to push their ideas. Powerful people, listen to what they have to say. But insiders understand one unbreakable rule. They don't criticize other insiders. Elizabeth Warren describing a meeting with Lawrence Summers, director of the National Economic Council, spring 2009. So that was 2 years after she was telling us how she quit her job, or quit school because she was pregnant, which of course later became a lie. We all know what Warren picked. It's very clear to me based on, the shows that she has access to and the people that she has access to and the people she's not criticized by, that she's clearly an insider. These two get criticized by those people because to a certain degree at least they are outsiders. Yang hasn't seen a lick of criticism and has had access to all of those people. So I think it's very apparent to me, since he, promotes... Oh, one more thing. His venture for America is just like Teach for America, so much in fact like Teach for America that it was funded by the same people who founded Teach for America. And those people are the people that are trying to privatize our education system. So it just comes together to a whole lot of... It's clear to me that he's aware that there is corruption in this world. It's clear to me that there's some corruption in this world he's not willing to talk about. It's clear that promoting censorship policy is very important to his campaign for some strange reason, and that the tech companies, who will also make a fortune off of UBI, clearly don't seem all that nervous about paying that value-added tax. Tech companies have been promoting UBI since 2016, really hard. I don't think that is coincidental. I think it's really funny that I have been promoting UBI for longer than Andrew Yang, because his 2014 book doesn't talk about it. So anybody who's saying, Yang was the one who brought UBI, we know he's going to do it better than Tulsi's UBI, she's a faker, we don't even know how much UBI she's going to give us. She's going to give $1,000 a month. She's not going to say that you can't get UBI on top of food stamps, because that's humanity first and good math. And, I'm sorry, but even Yang hasn't been repping it for all that long. It's a 120-year-old idea. And the fact that the mainstream people who bring us our mainstream news and bring us our candidates are comfortable giving us a UBI if it means winning back their unified press. That doesn't surprise me at all. Yang and Tulsi have a lot of things in common. When you get right down to it, he's the only person I've heard besides her that's talking about revitalizing our coral reefs and sustainable agriculture. Bernie's talked about it a little bit, but Yang's gotten into more of the details. And that isn't surprising because he's the data-driven candidate, and the data is what people are saying that resonates with voters. So if someone says it, like Tulsi, he's immediately going to pick it up. That's just how it works. I mean, it's not a bad way to run a campaign when you get right down to it. The trick is, you need to actually follow through with that. You need to make sure that you are bringing in what people talk about. Because otherwise, if people keep talking about one of your policies that is clearly not acceptable, like let's say, for example, if you wanted to bring in an authoritarian media board nominated by the tech companies and that wants to reunify the press and get Americans agreeing on facts again, that might be a policy that needs some revision. And when I started this campaign 5 months ago, it was a little bit different. His policy called for fake news police and media ombudsmen, one for every state representative that were supposed to be, fact checkers in their personal districts. So people thought that sounded way too authoritarian. So he changed it a little bit. He got rid of the media ombudsman and got rid of the name fake news police, but basically kept it the same. Reunify the press, and we're going to have a board nominated by tech giants and industry that is going to get Americans agreeing on facts again. Because I miss the days of 3 news channels that all said the same thing, and we can't get back to that time, but steps do need to be taken since the 2016 Russia meddling to make sure that our American discourse doesn't degenerate. Those are all direct quotes from his media fragmentation policy. And that policy has been there for 4 or 5 months now. I've sent many emails and many tweets, and it still stays there. I've also been talking about how in 169 policies, this man, Andrew Yang, who is a tech guy who should understand that censorship's a big issue, is silent on censorship and on kid herders. And that's with a T or a D, both. 169 policies without talking about the most vile... I'm not going to get into it because I want to keep this video on the internet, but look up Extreme Cults and Beliefs on Hulu. Watch those 7 episodes, and that will tell you why this is a really important issue. And if you consider organizations like this in a society where everybody gets $1,000 a month, what happens when they get $1,000 for every single person that they control? I don't think good things. I think it's really, at this point, conspicuous and frustrating that Andrew Yang hasn't considered this or isn't willing to issue a policy on this, because it only takes one statement to say, of course I'm going to disavow and do what I can to stand against the most vile and awful human acts on this planet. The fact that he's not willing to do that after half a dozen emails and probably close to 1,000 tweets, the fact that it's losing him votes to stay silent on this when it's a really easy statement to make, tells me it's not that easy of a statement to make. And, there's 2 UBI candidates out here that are repping a lot of the same policies, ranked choice voting. I think Tulsi's single-payer plus plan is better than Yang's Medicare choice, Medicare for those who want it plan. I don't know exactly what it's going to end up being, but it's kind of vague right now. And I think that reunify the press is an absolutely unacceptable idea. That's nuts. And so if he doesn't change that, if he demonstrates that that is an important policy to him, that is part of his platform and needs to stay, I really urge you to consider that that's a demonstration that you should go for the better UBI candidate. Because anybody willing to vote for Andrew Yang is going to be willing to vote for Tulsi Gabbard. Anybody who's not being disingenuous, that is. They're friends. They're on the same team. But many people aren't willing to vote for Yang that are diehard Tulsi fans. So if you want to get UBI through, if you want to not have a censorship press and cooperate with China on AI censor state China, just saying, if you want to actually get your president in the White House and also have a free future where we can criticize our government, I urge you to consider what I'm saying here. Castro. So, Castro's biggest issues, his brother supports doxing, and his border policy is atrocious. If you actually want to rep immigrant rights, you're going to vote for Tulsi Gabbard because she's the only one that's coming correct when it comes to what we do to mess up the lives of South Americans and the causes that will make people want to form immigrant caravans and leave their home, their family, and friends to go to a place where nobody speaks their language, and probably many of them knowing that 85% or a large portion of women end up getting abused on that journey, going anyway. Knowing that some kids never make it out on the other side, going anyway. I mean, that's a lot to undertake, and that clearly says that our world is messed up. Nobody's talking about how we mess it up and how we can actually fix it. We're all just talking about what we do for the people who get here. And Tulsi's got a good plan for them too. Whatever is important to you on that issue, Tulsi reps it better. And Tulsi's brother didn't dox people just because they supported a political agenda that he disagreed with. And I think that exposing people's personal information for what they do politically is Orwellian as all heck, and we need to not do that and not support a candidate whose brother is willing to do that. Especially if that candidate was handpicked to become part of Obama's cabinet by an email from Citigroup. Castro's out. Beto. Beto's message is, I'm from the most diverse city in the world or whatever, and we don't view each other as... It's Tulsi's message. I mean, she comes from the state where we have a majority of minorities, and Aloha basically means I recognize the spirit of your humanity, and all people are people, water is life. If that Beto message is resounding with you, but you don't want a babbling moron like Beto to be your candidate, you're jumping ship and going straight for Tulsi Gabbard. If you're boneheaded enough to think that Beto's your candidate, maybe it's for his bold stances on gun control and gay rights and human rights in general. But quite frankly, Tulsi is the Hawaiian senator where we have a majority of minorities, and she reps it, she lives it, she is it, and on top of that, she comes much more correct on the issues. Gun control is something we need to address, but if you make it, a mandatory buyback, who's not going to listen to a mandatory buyback? People who might want to shoot something up. On top of that, I don't know how you're going to enforce it, and quite frankly, when you look at the statistics, there were 300 assault rifle deaths in 2018 and 6,000 handguns. It's not going to really do much. And more importantly, what it is going to do is make it so that those people that are actually worried about various reasons why you might want to have an assault rifle that will sound ridiculous, don't get me wrong, but if we're going to actually talk about this issue, we need to talk about this issue. And as my brother said, it's important to really approach this issue from the point of view of the people who, feel differently. It's not hunters who think that it's unreasonable to have people killers. It's why do the people who want the people killers want them? And when that's the issue that we're talking about, let's get right down to it. Since I've gone out onto YouTube and listened to some of these various casts of people who do rep this issue and why they do, the facts of the matter is every armed conflict in history has been decided from engagement distance. Whether you're talking about the English longbow, Genghis Khan and his horse archers, gunpowder, or the bigger and bigger guns that got made in World War II. It's always a matter of who can hit somebody from the furthest away has a distinct advantage. And what rifles can really do over a handgun or a shotgun is engage at a distance. That's what they're made for. Now, you can go into a crowded area with a handgun or a shotgun and you can do a whole lot of damage. Like I said, 6,000 people died from handguns in 2018 compared to, I want to say 270 or 330, somewhere in that range, from assault rifles. And there were a few other categories as well. But the thing that I think that we need to address is high capacity magazines. I don't know that there's any reason to have those around. Like realistically, you can defend your home with a 10 round mag. Like, it's about engagement distance, not about ability to pour out rounds when you're behind cover and you can, if that's the thing that you're concerned with. The high capacity mags really are only for pumping out tons and tons and tons of bullets. And if you want to go do that at a firing range, fine. Waste the ammo all you want, but I can't come up with a really good reason to pump out tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of bullets. You could have a few clips, and you could have someone else in your, hunkered down apocalypse compound refilling clips as you fire out clips. Like, that works for me. If that's your concern. Because that's the type of person we're talking about here. Is why do you want an assault rifle? Is because when there's this awesome book, 1 minute after, I think 1 second after. It's about a EMP hitting America and all of our infrastructure power grid goes down. Suddenly we have tons and tons and tons of cattle dying in Texas, tons and tons and tons of corn rotting in Iowa, and most people starving, and a few small towns sort of hunkering down trying to figure out how to get out of this weird apocalypse situation, right? In that scenario, some of the government and police agencies ended up becoming sort of roving bandits. And in the end, I'm going to spoil it, the government did come in and sort of reestablish order, but a large portion of America had been lost to China, and many people had died. It was horrific. And I think probably a pretty realistic take on how something like that might go down. But bottom line is, if something like that happens, something that truly, like, the bleep hits the fan, you might need to be defending yourself against these, police departments that have the armored tank vehicles and the snipers and the riot gear. And if you've got shotguns and pistols, they're just going to come in and take whatever stuff they want to take. And even if it's not them, it could be roving other people who just didn't give up their right. Again, this is not a realistic scenario that we, on a day-to-day, have to worry about. We have such bigger issues to talk about in this election, but for the people who that's the issue, this is sort of where we're at here. And I think that since such a relatively small number of deaths happen from rifles, if you make like a 10 round or I don't know, a 20 round, I don't do guns, but a reasonably small round magazine limit size for rifles will accomplish the same goal of minimizing mass shootings to a large degree. I think there are many other more appropriate and effective ways to address that in terms of mental health and keeping better statistics of sort of which groups tend to be the ones doing this, because I think it is really clear when you pour through the reports that there are some trends that are consistent, but we tend not to emphasize them and report on them. The mental health aspects, the having previous training with guns combined with PTSD combined with those mental health aspects, there are consistencies. The number of people that I've had. The other one, like I said, is gay rights, and Beto says that he's going to make it so that you can't be a non-profit and be homophobic. And one of the pundits I was watching said that this is going to, jokingly actually, he said this is going to affect constitutional, he said that other people said that this is going to affect how we interpret our Constitution, but that's ridiculous. And I paused for a second, I was like, affects how we're going to interpret our Constitution? That's a really interesting point. I'm going to unpack that for a second. How does it affect how we interpret our Constitution? Well, in the direct sense, it says that you can't be a non-profit organization if you want to be homophobic. A little bit broader, we could argue that it implies, sets a precedent for you can't be exclusionary if you want to be a non-profit. And then you get into the question of what do we call exclusionary? Like if I were, say, the mayor's son and I wasn't invited to some group that I wasn't invited to, could I then try to get my dad to make that company not exist because they were exclusionary? If a group, let's say a group isn't officially homophobic, but their church, still preaches fire and brimstone, and the people in it clearly don't make it very comfortable for anyone to want to go to that church if they identify as an LGBTQ member. can we then take that church down because they don't have any members? Or is it their active sentiment? And how active does that sentiment need to be? If all the members happen to be homophobic, but the newsletter doesn't say anything, if the church isn't officially, as a organization, setting down that doctrine, where do you draw the line? And I think that since we have certainly a history in this country of lawyers jumping through hoops to try to crack down on organizations they don't like, it might be a dangerous avenue to go down. And more importantly, I think functionally, as I just kind of pointed out, if you make it illegal for a nonprofit to be homophobic, in this case, let's go with the actual particular case we're looking at here. If that nonprofit just stops talking about it in the newsletter, but the preacher still talks about it and the congregation still talks about it, is that acceptable? Harris. She's talking about prison reform to try to cover up how bad she is on prison reform. She kept a man on death row knowing that he was innocent, knowing that she had information to expunge him because it was good for her career. And she laughed about the idea of legalizing pot in 2014. She had the chance to fix a lot of these problems she's talking about addressing while she was in office. And it wasn't politically acceptable or whatever. Sure, you can say what you want to say. Tulsi's going to say what's right every time. And she slayed yo butt. So, get out. Kamala's candidacy is done, and anyone who was repping her is going for Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi is fire within the black community, within anyone in the Middle East who wants to actually get things done properly. I know she's resounding hard within the veteran community. Basically, any group that hears about her loves her. It's just a matter of getting them to hear about her, which is such an insane position we're in right now. We're actively trying to, the DNC is actively trying to campaign against the most electable candidate with the best policies. They're campaigning against winning. Klobuchar. Her message is, if you're tired of being pulled right, left, you just come with me, I'm in the middle, and we'll all agree. Centrism, business as usual, rah, rah. If you're tired of getting pulled right, left, go with the woman who's trying to end that whole divisive rhetoric nonsense and calling out the people mongering it, who is, promoting assertive aloha and bringing people together to be compassionate humanitarians. Mayor Pete, the 9-year intelligence officer for McKinsey. I'm sorry, but your campaign is dead after that 4th debate. Anyone who says differently is a moron. But, that's pretty much that. And Tom Steyer, you're just the new Joe Biden. Joe Biden, funny enough, people who were thinking Joe Biden, who were just kind of the name recognition, business as usual, I don't know that many names, but I like the sound of a few people. If they're jumping shit from Joe, they're going straight to burn. You know why? Because they're, surface level glazed over name recognition people, and they've only heard of those two candidates, and Byrne's saying some good stuff. And, they might go to Steyer. That's fair. They might come up here too. But bottom line, the majority of these candidates are going here. And once you're here, you don't leave. Most of these arrows are when they smear her, when they send something baseless out into the atmosphere, and millions of us all go, you're being baseless and smearing and it's nonsense, and we shout you down. And the few people that hear it and don't already recognize that immediately go out there and go, what's up with this? They quickly find any YouTube video that debunks it, and they go, oh, well, that's nonsense. And then that's that. Very simple. If, however, you have some smear that might, grab onto somebody, like, well, she used to be a member of the CFR, and, the CFR is just the recruiting ground for future presidents and whatnot, and it's the most corrupt organization in the world. And you know what? It is. It's true. But she got blackballed from the CFR the same time she got blackballed from the DNC back in 2016, standing up for Byrne. And, if anything, having some inside information on how the evil dudes do their evil doing might not be a bad thing. But it's clear to me that whatever loyalty she may have had to them is long gone. She clearly is getting smeared to all heck, and if she makes up Crap Smear Mountain and ascends to the highest office of the land, she owes them nothing. And she's aware of the kind of evil they craft and calling it out almost by name. But if some smear does start to, really take hold in your brain, you come out here, you poke your head up, you look at all the other options sitting on the stage. There is no better option. Period. Bernie is probably the closest you can get. He's got a pretty consistent record as far as domestic policy and the issues he's been, vocal about for a long time. I understand his horrible voting record because you don't stay in Congress without making some compromises on war. I mean, you look at what happened to Senator Paul Wellstone. Clearly his plane crash wasn't an accident. They blamed it on inclement weather, but we have pictures 15 miles away from the crash site that show a clear blue, perfectly, not a ripple on it lake from some hikers that same morning. So it wasn't inclement weather. Then they blame it on pilot error, and he's the most meticulous pilot you've ever seen. But bottom line is, senators that are outspoken about war don't generally have a 20-year career. And I can understand making that tactical decision in order to try to actually affect economic change from the inside. And that does seem to be what Bernie has done in his life. So I can accept the fact that he voted for Iraq 1, Afghanistan, bombing in Serbia and Gaza, covert operations in Syria. I can accept that he's never really stood against our regime change and whatnot. What I can't accept is that now in 2019, when the spotlight is on and he can say whatever he wants, and the DNC could try to smear him, but they already do smear about Russia. I don't understand why he's still willing to promote their Russia nonsense and not talk about some of these other things. Because Byrne is such a big name and getting so much attention right now that if he was calling this stuff out like Tulsi is, it'd be game over. I mean, it already might very well be game over. I think Tulsi has now kind of surpassed Byrne as far as electability goes in a lot of ways in a lot of people's eyes. Byrne has really shot himself in the foot by so vocally, conspicuously not supporting Tulsi Gabbard. Not vocally, but conspicuously, silently not supporting Tulsi Gabbard. But anyway, when you poke your head out of the Aloha wave and you look around, there's not really a better option. There's nobody that is repping any of these issues. The clowns, the traffickers, the military industrials, big tech censorship. There's only one other person talking about decriminalizing opioids, maybe two. Education, she's the only one that's talking about teaching open education curricula, not just universalizing our indoctrined education system. She's the only one talking no more regime change wars. She's the only one talking free Assange. She's the only one talking about a clean energy economy by 2035 and not a CO2 tax to pay for inefficient, sustainable alternatives by 2050. Did I miss anything? End the Fed, no more fossil fuel subsidies, end fracking and offshore drilling on day one, and talking about the causes of poverty worldwide, not just in our own country, and ending our divisive rhetoric. She's the only one who hasn't called half of America racist and is then going to need to ask for their votes later. I think I've made my case. So, with that, let's remember, Aloha trumps hate. Let's troll him with his own freaking tagline, because that's going to be hilarious. Let's make a Gabbard America, people. She has the best policies. I will argue with you all day on Twitter about this, and I'm not just going to, be hard-headed and adamant about it. I will listen to what you have to say and shoot you down with factual information. Because that's what I do pretty much professionally at this point. So, best policies, most electability. She's the only one resonating in every single group that she's resonating in. And there are many Americans that will only vote for her and no one else, blue or red. If you want to win and bring the best thriving future humanity possible to this planet, thanks for gabbing Aloha America, people. Aloha America. Mahalo. Toodles. Thanks for tuning in. Don't let them skeptical Skeksis steal your essence, dudes.